This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, back once again with my co-host, Brian Solomon. Happy New Year, Brian.
Happy New Year, Al. Happy to be here, as always.
Yes, and joining us for this episode, a very loaded, very newsworthy episode, is our boss, editor-in-chief of PWI, Kevin McElvaney. How are you? Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year. Good to be back on the podcast. Feels like it hasn't been that long, but it probably has been longer than I realized.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks. This is the first podcast of 2023, and we are just weeks into the year, and we already have a few stories that I think will probably be in the running for, top 10 stories of the year, and not necessarily good news, obviously. So we're going to be talking about all of them. Obviously, the most pressing being the tragic death of Jay Briscoe. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. I'm sure it caught all of us by surprise. And then also we're doing a little bit of an experiment here, bringing back a feature that we haven't seen in Pro Wrestling Illustrated for a number of years, the PWI Roundtable. And we thought this might be a good opportunity to kind of do double duty here with the podcast and a feature for the magazine. We're going to be talking all things WWE, the sale, the return of Vince McMahon, the departure of Stephanie McMahon, some other newsworthy departures, all of them kind of related. A huge first few weeks of 2023 for WWE, and we will talk all about it in just a moment. Real quick, let's talk about Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the latest issue. Kevin, it is not out yet. The digital edition is out. The print edition is not correct, and it is one of our big tentpole issues, the Year in Wrestling, the Achievement Awards.
Yeah, it's available for print pre-order. It's going to be on sale in a couple of weeks from the time we're recording this. But the digital edition, I would highly recommend people purchase that specifically on the PWI web app. So it's pwi.zinioapps.com. And that's also linked on our homepage at pwi-online.com. But once you buy it on that app, if you subscribe, it'll start with that issue right away. It'll start you immediately right off with the most recent, which is the awards issue. Or if you just buy that single issue, either way, whatever you purchase, using that same login that you make for that will work across all your devices. And I don't think we've been as clear as we could be about that, but basically you can buy this and you're spending a few bucks on the issue, and then you can take it, you can read it on your iPad, your iPhone, your Android, your laptop, and you get it in the customized formats that look best on each. So it really is a good deal to get the digital edition, and you get it before the print. So
yep, and as I mentioned, I know this is one that everybody seeks out. I always have. By now, some of the news might be out there. We're going to hold off on going into depth in the awards to a future episode. We might wait until the magazine is out and you actually hold it in your hand. But obviously, we're talking Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year, Woman of the Year, Tag Team of the Year. And absolutely lots of big news there. These are chosen by you, so you can't get on our case about these ones. But as Kevin mentioned, head over to our website to make sure you pick it up and subscribe, and make sure you don't. We're at the beginning of another year, and we're already talking about our WrestleMania issue and so much more. So good way to start the year. Go ahead and subscribe to Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Okay, guys, let's jump into it here. And this one is obviously not pleasant to talk to. Every time you've got a death in wrestling, we talk about how sad it is. It really does feel like this one, given the circumstances, really hit the wrestling community hard, really a heartbreaker, in part because you're talking a guy who was essentially still in his prime. And, you could argue still hadn't achieved everything there was to achieve. But beyond that, a father, a friend, we've heard all the outpouring of love for Jay Briscoe early in the week. I guess it was Tuesday night. We got word that he was killed in a car accident in his home, Laurel, Delaware. I think taking his two daughters to cheerleading practice. I mean, there's certainly some irony there. for a guy who works such a dangerous style, who we last saw in a double dog collar match, bleeding all over the place, going through tables, and meets his end, dropping off his daughters to cheerleading practice. Absolutely heartbreaking. Fascinating in that he was a guy who, as far as WWE or even AEW, never really reached the major leagues. And we could talk a little bit about what was behind some of that. At times Jay Briscoe was his own worst enemy, but even despite that, the outpouring for him really spoke to the imprint that he left in the wrestling business, that everybody from Triple H to on NXT, they're acknowledging it live, really left a huge legacy, but an absolute heartbreaker. Brian, I'll ask you, what was your reaction to the news of the death of Jay Briscoe?
Shock. I mean, just like everybody else, just shock. And then, like, as the details were starting to come through slowly but surely, then learning that his kids are in the car with him and that sort of thing. And as a parent, it's just unthinkable and very hard to wrap your head around. I had the responsibility of having to write it up as part of the wrestling news and that kind of thing, and just having to be detached and impartial as a writer and be writing about something that is I'm just glad I didn't have to be the one that had to read it. That was Mike Sempervive, but I mean, just I don't know, impossible to truly comprehend, like you said. And it's the trite thing that everybody says, but it's true. It's like you just never know when something like that could happen. Just to always tell people you love them, and just you never know when it's going to be your last time. It's like you were saying how it's so different. It's different from a lot of the other ones we hear about. Sometimes you hear about these things and either somebody's extremely old or sick, like, Antonio Inoki, or it's a situation where it's somebody that was struggling with things for a long time, like a Scott Hall, where it's not something like this. It's just act of God. I mean, what can you say? It's truly tragic. And under contract to a major wrestling company, right now, it's a major blow. Blow.
And obviously this is about so much more than wrestling when you talk about two little girls losing their dad, and his wife losing her husband, and obviously Mark losing his brother. But what we do is talk about wrestling, right? So that is part of this. And Kevin, what can you say about, and this is one of the real sad things is, thankfully Mark is still around. We don't know what the future is for him, but this is the end of the Briscoe brothers, right? Yeah. And now that there is some finality to that, you could look back on, and it's crazy because, I mean, they were just in one of the most talked about matches of the year a month ago, but now you can look back on that, as kind of a closed chapter. What is the legacy of the Briscoes in wrestling, and even Jay Briscoe? Because even though they are best known as a tag team, Jay obviously had a very successful singles career, more so than Mark, a two-time world champion in Ring of Honor. I tweeted about it. I mean, to me, as much as in some ways they were so different than everything else in Ring of Honor, they also in some ways really kind of encapsulated that Ring of Honor spirit in being different, in being the rebels. And that rebel spirit, I think is part of their legacy and why they're so revered and will be remembered so well, but also at times is what held them back, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to touch on there, as you said, but I think the most notable thing is the shift in how we're referring to Jay and to the Briscoes as, now it is sadly the end of them as a tag team act and attraction. I'm always a bit reticent inside the magazine. Like if something crosses my desk, or if I'm writing something myself and, headed toward using this kind of language, I don't like using the words greatest of all time, legend, that sort of thing, to refer to people who are still active. And that's an old fashioned quality. And I think there should be some time to look back and reflect. But like the reality is, we already knew that this was a Hall of Fame tag team, that this was among the most influential, popular, and I mean, we'll say it, greatest tag teams of all time. If you want to look at, despite them not being this major drawing card on a widely viewed TV promotion, they were, cornerstones of Ring of Honor, and Ring of Honor at its peak did do, very well, and was arguably the number 2 in the US. And you had their style influencing so many other teams. I mean, do you have the Young Bucks or the Usos without the Briscoes? I mean, probably not. I think they look like very different tag teams. And the two of them, what they did in the ring stands on its own. I mean, 13-time Ring of Honor tag team champions. That's remarkable. They had several. They held several of their major championships just within the last year. They had in Impact, on the independent circuit at Game Changer and House of Glory Wrestling. They won the Crockett Cup last year. They were on the cover of our magazine. I think that was the first time they were on the cover of our magazine. But it was very much in the vein of tag teams from the 1980s, and like this is a major achievement. And what I think is nice, because there has been controversy, and we'll get into it more specifically, but around the Briscoes at times, and Jay, again, potentially being his own worst enemy. I think this run over the last couple of years has really cemented them as an all-time great team. And I think beyond that, what we have heard about Jay now and over the last couple of years, comments he's made in the past, things that have been understandably seen as very offensive. He has, by all accounts, been incredibly remorseful about them. And I don't know Jay on a personal level, but I can speak to a lot of people I know do know him, and have just said he's the sweetest guy. Really treats everybody with respect. Like total opposite from his in-ring character, because he's just this maniac in the ring, and he's just like wants to get out there and hurt people, but behind the scenes, the farthest thing. And I mean, he's put this out there, but Paul Pratt, one of our contributing writers who moonlights as Pollo Del Mar and NWA, got to know the Briscoes over the last couple of years. And, Paul's openly gay, and Pollo is a character in drag. So, very like openly LGBTQ community member there who, basically said, look, you can feel how you want about the Briscoes and about a comment that Jay Briscoe made years ago, but I truly believe that he has spent all of these years since he first apologized for it, being very sorry, that he has worked to understand other people. And I mean, the truth is, like, he just seemed like a very, very genuinely good person, and somebody who wanted to treat other people well and his family well above all else. And I realize it covered a lot of ground there, and we can get more in the weeds with some of it, but those are my thoughts. Lots of thoughts.
I think what you're talking about, and it is, it's an adjective I use a lot when talking about the Usos, and as you touched on, I think a lot of that might have been influenced by the Briscoes, and it is authenticity, right? I mean, they felt real, for warts and all, and that's where some of the controversy came from. But it's also what made them, and maybe Jay in particular, human, right? Was that he was a flawed guy who maybe inherited certain thoughts and views of the world that are held by a lot of people. And I think, as you're touching on, now getting out there in the world and coming to know more people, I think maybe opened his mind and changed his views of some things. But yeah, I mean, to a man, everybody's talked about what a sweetheart of a guy he is, and a guy who touched the careers of so many people. Because the reality is, when you think about Ring of Honor, certainly for the first 10 years or so, it was the factory for future stars. And you look at WWE now, and and AEW, and whether you're talking about everybody from Kenny Omega, Bryan Danielson, Kevin Steen, Seth Rollins, the Bucks, go on and on. I mean, they all came through there, and that one kind of a steady force in Ring of Honor all those years was the Briscoes. And part of it is because of this, because they couldn't get hired anywhere else. But it almost contributes to their legacy, because there's sort of the punk rock band that never went mainstream, right? That never sold out. And it's not to say that they wouldn't have if they had the chance, but they didn't. And, Jay Briscoe, I think, was on the very first Ring of Honor show, and was there winning the tag team championship at Final Battle last year. So, you talk about, and I think they did get into the Ring of Honor Hall of Fame, which is a new thing. I mean, you could name the Ring of Honor Hall of Fame after the Briscoes. They really are Ring of Honor, like nobody else. But Brian, I guess the other side is, and it's really to talk about this, but sometimes when you get an artist or somebody who is brilliant in their career and they die young, their legacy can sometimes be kind of blown up and romanticized beyond what it really was. Is there a chance of that here, or the Brits? I think they really were that great. I mean, and I just wrote their write up for the tag team 100, and again, the frustrating part is that, like, as great as they are, it's like, God, you guys could be even bigger than this,
I would call them, in my opinion, the greatest tag team of the last 20 years that never worked for WWE. I would feel very, very confident in saying that. But like you said, a part of the reason why they never went to a bigger company is because of those controversies. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I was trying to keep track of them while you guys were talking, so I'm going to do my best to sort of represent it all. Sure. One thing I want to mention, too, is because you mentioned about Pollo Del Mar. There was also a very high-profile tweet from Effie, who, as we all know, is a major, a high-profile person within the gay community of the pro wrestling business, also echoing very similar sentiments. I think that, somebody like Jay Briscoe is a classic example of why we need to give people space to grow and learn and progress and evolve. And we can't, it's a very different world now because we have social media. We have the ability to know what everyone is thinking about every subject. And I think, it's unfortunate. Like, if you went back in time pre-Twitter and if Twitter existed and you learned what some of the most revered people in pop culture thought about every little thing, we would all be very shocked and disappointed in many people. And now it's different. So, you have to operate differently. But I think for somebody like him who was willing to learn and grow and change, there has to be an opportunity. We can't just banish people to the cornfield forever. If someone is unrepentant, if someone is unwilling to learn and change, it doesn't recognize what they did, that's something different. But there has to be a way back for people. And I know, and I'll go one step further to say that there's a certain amount. I was very disheartened to learn about that Warner Brothers Discovery would not allow AEW to give him any kind of a tribute. I find it's a certain kind of corporate cowardice. I'll just say it. Like, I'm too cynical to think that it's out of any kind of altruism. I think it's out of fear. These corporations are afraid of the repercussions and ramifications. And sometimes you just have to take a stand with somebody that truly deserved it. In his case, truly deserved it. Something should have been done. Like I said, there's got to be a way back for people who deserve it. I think sometimes it's unfortunate, like I said, that we live in a time where we have to know what everybody thinks about every little thing. There was no need to even know what Jay Briscoe thought about those topics. It just bore no relevance. But that's a moot point. We live in a time when those things are known. And look, like I'm sorry, just 1 second, Kevin. What Al alluded to, the views of Jay Briscoe, especially if you go back 20, 30 years, would have unfortunately been the views of the majority of straight Americans. And
Well, the way he phrased it was a little more extreme.
Was shocking. Yes, absolutely, was shocking. No, and I don't mean to say to the extent that he expressed them. I just mean his kind of
homophobia. Yeah,
right. I mean, Barack Obama.
I was about to make that point. Barack Obama was
Barack
against
Obama
gay marriage.
was against gay marriage 20 years
elected,
ago. Hillary Clinton.
Less than that when he was elected. Yeah,
the country changes. People change. The kind of whatever is the mainstream view shifts and changes. And even putting that aside, he changed his views. And what do we expect of people? There has to be a way to change and grow. And I don't think anybody should be punished for something they said years and years ago that they have apologized for, to be continued to be punished for it. I find to be pointless, especially when someone's died. And I know I'm going on and on about this. It's just not the time. I see this happening a lot on Twitter. It's like we have this pathological need to dance on the graves of people when they die and to dig up everything that they ever said or did. And, the fact that there are 2 children that lost their father and a wife that lost their husband, like in my mind, that's the bigger issue in the moment than to try to come out and be like, I'm the virtuous person who's going to point out the horrible things he's. It's not the time for that. I mean, maybe it's being a parent that makes me think that way, but that's my view, Kevin. I'll let you talk now. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, sure. No, what I was going to say is this is also somebody who, this isn't something he said a couple of years ago and then made a big phony apology for, and then never, evolved past that. I think he, has been contrite continually over the years and has, again, worked to grow. And I don't think if anyone said, hey, how could you say that? He'd be like, oh, he wouldn't say, oh, what do you mean? It was years ago. Forget about it. He probably would have been, the first to say this was, I never should have said that. That was wrong. But as you said, yeah, people are grieving. There are people who I am mutual friends with on Twitter who are, have been very outspoken about him over the years. They're like, kind of, look, you can like him if you want, but I'm never going to forget this thing. Or I don't like that they used to wear Confederate gear, which is a whole other discussion, and that's their right. Like, people can feel how they want to feel. But even those people were kind of like, look, people are grieving. This guy had a lot of friends. This guy had, they're genuinely upset. Like, say, like, go write it in your diary or something for now. Cause it is like a really, it's not to say that you can't have conversations, but this really, truly was not the time and the place, especially for someone who had grown so much. But Brian, as you said, actually 3 kids, because he has a son as well. His son was at home safely and was not in the car. But I also want to add, his daughters were badly injured in this accident.
I guess one of them, last I heard, hadn't recovered feeling in her legs,
or she was beginning to recover feeling, but like the lower part of the legs, it's obviously developing, and I mean, hopefully her condition will continue to improve. But that's, they're going to have to live with the trauma of that forever with a dad who, by all accounts, was very hands-on, loving family man who they, if you have an average run-of-the-mill relationship with your dad, for lack of a better word, like you're not super close, but he's your dad, you're still going to be devastated. If you're in the car with an Uber driver you've just met and that happens, you're going to be devastated. And then this is their loving father who they have this incredibly close relationship with. Early in the pandemic, you had Jay Briscoe. He was practicing cheerleading routines with his daughter, and Ring of Honor shared that on social media. Yeah, and it's just all you hear is that from anybody who knows this guy. You never have anybody say, "Oh, this guy was just an ass. I never liked him." That's never ever the answer. It's always people saying what a great guy he was. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel bad that we're even talking this long about the negatives because even though
I think it's his whole legacy, right? I mean, it's a picture of the whole life, and right. Yeah, I mean, and I think if it weren't for the various forks in the road and decisions that he made in his career, he's not in that car, right? I mean, he's not driving his daughters to cheerleading because, frankly, it is a and in that sense, maybe he wouldn't have had it any other way as far as having that luxury of being able to be that available as a dad for his daughters.
I do think he eventually would have come back to that, honestly, especially as time wore on and maybe a WWE career was not as secure as it once was. I do think you're seeing more people like that now who are realizing kind of what's important and like, hey, I can make a whole lot more money here, or I could be home with my kids. And, you know, to his credit, I think he eventually would have circled back to that. And it just makes it all the more tragic.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a conversation way down the line to have with Mark Briscoe. But in some ways you feel like, you know, they ended up where they were supposed to end up and you know, built this. And you always wonder if they did go to WWE or anywhere, you know, would they have been the Briscoes? I mean, could they have wrestled the style and been as authentic and done the act that they did for all those years within the corporate setting of a WWE? And I'm sure they would have made a lot more money, but I don't, it wouldn't have been as kind of pure as the Briscoes that we've had all these years, for better or for worse.
Right. They might have become the new bushwhackers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, but that's the trajectory that they had. I mean, they were the sheep herders. They were vicious, wild, bloodthirsty lunatics, right? Yeah. And then they went to WWE and they became a kids act and they made a ton of money, but their whole act changed. I mean, you know, they definitely would have been able to use blood, and that was a big part of their act, but it's a big loss.
They were, I mean, just to touch a little bit more on again why we're talking about them, which is the wrestling. What an act, you know. And I started going to Ring of Honor shows in 2006, and they were one of those acts that very early on captivated me. And I remember being in the building for that feud with the Age of the Fall, which was Tyler Black and Jimmy Jacobs, right? Tyler Black now being Seth Rollins. And, you know, this was in front of a few hundred people in the Manhattan Center, the Grand Ballroom. And it felt so special. It felt like such a big deal, in part because of, again, the Briscoes had a way of making everything feel like such a big deal. And those, you know, before there was even a weekly Ring of Honor TV show, they used to have this kind of weekly 10-minute update on YouTube. That was their weekly television. And I remember I remember them like holding chickens and doing it from the farm. And it was just so raw and real. And they never lost that. I mean, it was, they were unlike any other act. And, you know, one of the cliches you hear all the time about a wrestler is, you know, he worked as hard in front of 100 fans as he would have in front of, you know, 60,000 fans at WrestleMania. With the Briscoes, that really was the case. I mean, maybe to a fault, because you'd be in some of these small shows and they'd be killing themselves and you'd be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? But they really left it all out there. And, you know, they're both great. I mean, you can't help but speak about them as a unit. But I do think, and I think I imagine Mark would say as much, Jay did stand out. Jay did go on to, and there was that time where they were hemorrhaging stars, right? And when Bryan Danielson left for WWE and Kevin Steen left and on and on. And that's where they turned to Jay Briscoe and put the title on him twice. And he more than held up his end. And, you know, gave you big time main events. And in some ways, you know, when you talk about the great Ring of Honor champions, his name might not be one that comes up. You know, the people talk Samoa Joe and CM Punk and Bryan Danielson. But in some ways, Jay Briscoe really was kind of like the quintessential Ring of Honor champion.
Yeah, he held it down during a crucial period, as you said. And I mean, he went from being this tag team guy who by no means should have been as successful as a singles. You know, he shouldn't have been able to handle it at the level that he did, but he certainly did. He was number 7 in the 2015 PWI 500. And that's during a period, you know, there was by no means a guarantee that Ring of Honor is doing well then, but there was no guarantee that a Ring of Honor champion would be in the top 10 because it was, you know, there was a lot going on around then. And WWE was very hot and so on. But the fact that he did is really a testament to his adaptability, his loyalty to that company. You know, I mean, his for better, for worse, or you can debate all day about what might have happened if he'd been able to go somewhere else. But he, you know, really ended up meaning so much for that company. And I think it comes back to what you said, this authenticity and a sense of being genuine and not, I mean, certainly there was a dividing line between Jay the character, Jay the man. Like I said, he's aggressive and angry in the ring, and he's not like that at all outside of it. But it's, I mean, they were the chicken farmers from Southern Delaware who just kind of went out and, people keep sharing that, either quoting or sharing that clip with the Terry Funk didn't wear no mouthpiece, like while they were feuding with, who were they feuding with? It might have been, was it the American Wolves, but it was a like an MMA centric kind of team. And like, they were really a throwback to this Smash Mouth old school tag team, like the Sheep Herders or like so many other teams that would just go out there and have these wild brawls. And I think people really connected with that. And I mean, I can say, we're coming up, I talked to you guys a little bit about this, but we're coming up on another press deadline, and there wasn't a ton of time or space to do like substantial coverage of Jay's career, but he wound up being the focus of several columns. And there's a little something else that we put in the issue for his fans, because I think the Briscoes are such the kind of person who'd be listening to this podcast, who would be subscribing to our magazine, is they're a Briscoes fan, because they are pro wrestling. There are these larger than life characters, yet still steeped in reality. They wrestle this super intense style no matter where they are. They are the business, and they defined Ring of Honor during those core years.
And I think by working the style that they worked, because I know we were talking about, they're doing this in front of a few hundred people and they're killing themselves. It was sort of like a gamble that they took that paid off, because by doing that, they wound up building their legend and their legacy and curiosity and people wanting to see them and getting better bookings and things, hearing about what they were doing, word of mouth. That was a chance to take. I mean, there's a lot of people that try to do that and it goes nowhere and they destroy themselves for nothing, honestly. But like in their case, that was not the case. Like it really built even though smaller groups of people were seeing it at a time, it built their reputation in the business. And in the long run, it helped them become what they were.
Yeah. And if there is any solace, it is that there is such a body of work there. And I imagined a body of work that only now a lot of fans are going to discover. The reality is, a lot of people still never heard of the Briscoes, or only saw them for the first time through AEW and the feud with FTR. But I mean, this was news on CNN, NBC. So I imagine some folks are going to go out and seek out these matches. And because they've been at it for so long and they were there as all these great teams were coming up, there is such an incredible body of work there. I mean, the when you think about like the great tag teams of the past 20 years, they've worked with almost all of them, right? The Usos might be the one exception. I would have loved to have seen the Briscoes versus the Usos. Can you imagine? Yeah, but the Hardys, FTR, the Young Bucks, the American Wolves, on and on. I mean, the real great tag teams of the last 20 years, they all went through the Briscoes.
I don't remember if it was Mark or Jay. Maybe you guys remember, but one of them tweeted a rather negative response to the Usos being number one on the tag team list this year. Did you guys see that? I don't remember which one it was.
I saw it was something like I think it was
like basically F the Usos was essentially
right.
what it was.
And I do think they were working at that.
Right.
Honestly,
I know.
I think there's a lot of mutual respect between those three teams that were at the top.
The Usos tweeted about Jay's death.
They did.
One or both of them. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I mean,
and there was also it was the Briscoes tweeted, like imagine if we'd been on TV, because they were number 3, because they
right.
That's amazing, like part of undeniable year. And then FTR said, like, then you could have been number 2, meaning like FTR should have been number. Right. But it was just and it's cool.
But that's the incredible thing, though, that they weren't on TV and they still were number 3? Was it number 3?
Yeah, and they had some matches in Impact, but they didn't have a lot of matches in Impact, and they were mostly on pay-per-view.
Right.
And then, NWA streaming, everything else is streaming. They certainly had like a profile. They weren't like, doing this quietly in some VFW, right? Although they did have shows like that. But it is good that they got to this. They were able to, if this horrible thing was going to happen, I'm glad that at least beforehand they were able to kind of ascend to that level again.
Yeah.
It's fitting. And I mean, I was listening to, I think it was Wrestling Observer Live a day or so ago, and it was Brian Alvarez is reading out just messages from Observer readers, and a lot of people are saying stuff to the effect of, I'd heard their name. I never watched the Briscoes before this FTR feud, and since then I've been going down the rabbit hole, and they're incredible. And that's an awesome thing. Like, that's the best you can hope for when you have these kind of, it's weird to call them cross-generational teams. They're not like way different in age, but these teams from these different ways into the business.
They started so young, right? I mean, I heard, I guess this Meltzer saying that.
Yeah.
So Jay wrestled on the first Ring of Honor show, but Mark didn't because he was too young. I guess he was like 15 or something. So I mean, and they've been at it so long, and I guess Jay being the older brother, neither was even 40 years old yet.
I think Mark was even like wrestling. I heard like way back that he was wrestling places like under a mask so that they didn't know who it was because of the athletic committee. I don't know how true that is because there's paperwork and stuff you have to fill out, but who knows? Wrestling's a carny business, but they were at it for a long time and still going, really hard. And I think it's very cool that you have this new generation of focus or renewed focus on tag team wrestling, and for them to be so heavily in the mix with it, it's an awesome deal.
Our tag team ranking is only 3 years old now, but you got to think if it had been around for any length of time, 20 years ago, they would have been number one several times. I mean, there were years where they were tag team wrestling in the USA. I mean, you think about the years where WWE tag team champions were Michael McGillicuddy and David Otunga.
Or like Cherish Show or something like.
And what the Briscoes were doing in a Ring of Honor was just absolutely revolutionary. So, anyhow, suffice to say, our condolences go out to the Pugh family, Mark, his daughters, his son, everybody, and just an absolute tragedy. And for fans who don't know that much, you go seek him out. Just do a YouTube search on Briscoes, and you'll be absolutely blown away by what you see. Find some of those ladder wars with Generico and Steen, or the Age of the Fall. But just amazing stuff. So even before this happened, we had another story that was enough, as I touched on, to be one of the biggest stories, not just of the year, but of our lifetimes in wrestling. Last year we had it with Vince McMahon stepping down, and then we had whatever it was, 6 or 7 months there, which in some ways was like WWE paradise. It was like what WWE could be like post Vince McMahon. And we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast. Brian, you weren't buying that there was much, but sure enough, Vince McMahon is back. And that's only part of the story. He is back to facilitate a sale of WWE. Stephanie McMahon is gone. Some others are gone. And it just seems like a completely new day for WWE. And frankly, to each his own, but certainly for me and a lot that I followed, this doesn't feel like good news, right? I mean, none of it does. So I guess we could start there. Brian, I'll ask you this: is it good news, and is there a way that this becomes good news?
The only person this is good news for is Vince McMahon. That's it. It's and I don't know. I guess I underestimated or I overestimated Vince's similarity to other human beings, in the sense that anybody else in his shoes at his age, accomplishing what he has with the wealth that he has, having grandchildren and all that stuff, would have just been like, you know what? I'm good. All right. You guys do this. I'm going to let the money roll in. I'm going to go to Italy, which I guess he did for a month, which is unthinkable. Somebody should make a movie out of that, or a TV series or something. Vince McMahon in Italy, like just the thought of that. And I'm going to spend time with my grandkids. You would have just given up at that point. Not to mention the fact, look, I'll make it political. This is all on me. We're living in a post-Trump world where rules don't apply and people can just do whatever they want. And the fact that nobody would have tried this before because they wouldn't have thought they could have gotten away with it. And that's the only reason why. And Vince McMahon just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm just coming back. Yeah, there's a board of directors. Guess what? I'm a majority voter. So I'm going to just change the board and let's have a vote. Should I be the chairman? Oh, great. I'm the chairman now. Like no one would have been shameless enough to do that except for him. And I do think a big part of it is the fact that they seem to be doing better without him. I think this is very much a case of, if I can't have it, no one's going to have it. And screw you guys. I'm going to come in and you don't want it to be sold. You want to make your mark. Oh, you're going to vote against me to come back, which they all did, by the way, including Nick Khan, who was just effusively admiring Vince McMahon on Bill Simmons' podcast. He voted against him coming back. Stephanie voted against. Hunter voted against. I think that was the spark that set off the powder keg of basically, I'm going to now just sell this thing and screw all of you. And I really think that you can couch it in whatever kind of benefiting the shareholders and all this kind of thing, mumbo jumbo that they put out there to justify it. But I really think that's what it is, because here's the thing. The company, as we've all talked about, it was going to get sold within the next couple of years. It was headed that way. But I think with the changing of the guard, I think Paul and Stephanie, they wanted to make their mark. They wanted to kind of like get it into a different place before that happened. It was going to be sold. But the difference is, with Vince not in the picture, when it gets sold, he has no say over anything. He loses all power, because even his majority voting power would be gone once it's sold. He wanted to be there because he knows that if he sells it, if he's the one that sells it, he could put in whatever qualifications and riders and requirements that benefit him the most, including most likely some type of power or authority in whatever the new version of the company will be. And I really think that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, it is just an extremely, extremely self-serving move. And that's all it is.
Yeah, you mentioned Donald Trump, and I've thought about him a lot in all this too. I mean, there's definitely some parallels there, and
except Vince.
There's no secret, and there's no secret that the two are friends and allies. So I do think there's some birds of a feather as far as how you deal with loss or defeat. But the one thing that Nick Khan talked about that I have, does sort of ring true, for better or for worse, is this notion that this was Vince's company, right? This is his. Yes. And maybe it was naive all along to think that anything other than this was going to happen, especially given that he was still majority shareholder. So you always had to reckon with the fact that this is still his company. So when I talk about potentially good news, is there the potential to finally make that clean break? And I would think that would be more likely with a sale to an Amazon or an NBC, a Universal, Comcast. Less likely with the one that's been the most rumored, which is a Saudi sale where they would go private. I mean, as far as like a worst case scenario, I think that's it, right? I mean, they sell to the Saudis, they go back to being private, zero accountability, and Vince is installed very much as kind of the dictator of the whole thing. And I think that's bad for everyone. I mean, I just don't see an upside to that at all, Kevin.
Yeah, I think there was quite a bit of reasonable concern when that was being strongly suggested that that's where things were headed. Of course, any rumors that popped up on social media around that being an inevitability, well, that's not quite the case. There are certain hurdles you have to clear, as Nick Khan said on the Bill Simmons podcast. There are shareholders that need to be notified. You can't just sell a giant publicly traded corporation overnight. However, there was this quality, and this is just personal intuition here, in the language that Vince used when he was, attempting to get back to his seat as chairman of the board of directors, that kind of, hey, I know about this great opportunity we have, but the only way we can do it is if I come back on board and lead this sale. What does he know? Who is he talking to already? And I mean, there's of course evidence also that he was meeting with people from other companies. Regardless, you have a situation where if the operation is, turned private again and Vince is given free reign over it, I don't think that's good for anybody in terms of job security, in terms of how the show is run, the creative process. I mean, I think most people, even diehard defenders of the old way that Vince was doing things, could reasonably argue that the show is not better now. Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, anything. Because a lot of these Vince quirks that, let's face it, a lot of them he developed over the years. They weren't always the case. And preferences for things that he developed, and bad comedy and really just hack stuff, on a creative level, it's going to make the show a lot harder to watch. The viewership is higher since he left. The stock price went up when he retired. And you generally have all these people who were let go, who they wanted nothing more than to come back, and now faced with the prospect of him being involved in some of these operations again, potentially, because just because he came back under the pretenses of facilitating a sale does not mean he stays that way. It's just a mess. It's not a great situation. And since then you've had some people ousted from the board of directors. You've had others step down. You've had Stephanie resign from the company. You've had the heads of communication and public relations for the company who are now just completely out, including Adam Hopkins. I mean, he was there for better part of a quarter of a century, and now he's gone. So, and these are generally people who are very well liked within the company, and then just poof, they're gone. And, voluntary or not, you have this situation where things feel very chaotic over there. I do think we're headed toward a sale. We can have a discussion about who the new owners may be. But I don't think this is a great situation for WWE to be in. It's as negative in terms of outlook for the company, in my opinion, as it was positive when he departed initially.
And I also think it's a sad state of affairs and I don't think this is being talked about enough. Maybe it's because everybody's just so hopeless about it. But in terms of accountability, I mean, it's like, I don't know, it almost is exhausting to talk about it, but of zero accountability. And look, you mentioned Adam Hopkins, and I want to say, and this is because I knew them both, somebody else who'd been there almost as long as he was there. Well, about 20 years, not as well known to outsiders, but another VP of communications, Stephanie Fiandella. The reason I mention her is because Stephanie, who started there straight out of college, I mean, just an absolute success story. One of the things she did within the company is she headed up, I forget what the exact name of it was, but it was a group that was created by Stephanie to be designed for female employees of WWE, like, in a male-dominated industry, to make connections, to share information, to kind of have a safe space there. She resigned, and I don't know the ins and outs of it, but you can't tell me that at least part of that wasn't because, how can I get up in the morning? I am the head of this women's resource group within WWE. Right. This man is now back and running things. And what am I supposed to tell all these female employees? You can't tell me that's at least not part of it, of what's going on there, because what the message that it sends. Another thing, related to that, hearing Nick Khan, one of the things that bugged me to no end was him describe the Rita Chatterton allegations as basically just an obstacle and an encumbrance, the words he used, to a sale.
It's so insulting.
It is so disturbing. And here's the thing. Look, I'm not naive. I'm not cynical. I've worked there. I understand that's the way a lot of these guys think. You're not going to change that. But the audacity to feel safe to say it out loud on a podcast listened to by millions of people, a very high profile show, to just flippantly say that and not have any concern that it's going to be taken the wrong way. That's what bothers me more than anything, is just this, the confidence in those views is what bugs me. And
did you hear the Wall Street Journal report yesterday relating to Rudy Chatterton?
That there was a settlement, right?
Yeah. There was a settlement, and he probably already knew about that because it happened last month.
Right.
Yeah. That's the part where I am trying to be optimistic, and there's very little to be optimistic about. But this is a circumstance where if the company is sold and it goes in the right hands, it could be an improvement. And for some of the same issues we were just talking about with Jay Briscoe, some of the frustrations of corporately owned or corporately run wrestling, the reason why they won't do much to celebrate Jay Briscoe, some of that could help here because there is such a stink to Vince McMahon that you would think a legitimate corporation that bought WWE would want to get as far away from Vince McMahon as possible. I can't imagine that a Comcast-owned WWE or an Amazon-owned WWE or Disney or I don't know who else is in the discussion would be okay with it. Now, the flip side, again, you go private and you go to the Saudi government and forget about it. I mean, all bets are off. But it kind of makes me root for a Comcast to make a deal that is too good to turn down. And the company remains public. And I don't know the logistics of it, but they get rid of Vince McMahon once and for all. And it's sort of a shame that we're even having, this discussion, this guy who was like the father of pro wrestling. But I think at this point, it's sort of indisputable that he's just a complete negative force. I don't see the upside to Vince McMahon running WWE at all. I think it's all bad and no good.
Yeah. And I also think there's a couple of things here. He's, now that there's been generations of fans that grew up watching his product, and that see him as this like grandfatherly figure, like this Walt Disney figure or whatever, we can't forget the fact that this man destroyed the wrestling industry once before. He destroyed it. He did. He destroyed it to make room for what he wanted for his own company. And now it's almost like he's ready to just destroy it again in a different way to serve once again his own needs and his own ego, his own financial desires. He's ready to just blow it all up again. But the thing that you can't forget, and this has been talked about, but here's the problem with a Comcast or somebody else like that coming in. This is a company where their main source of revenue is media rights fees. If you own the company, where is the income coming from? So Comcast goes, oh, we're paying all this money for media rights fees to WWE because of Peacock and USA Network. Let's just buy them. Great. So now nobody's paying media rights fees to anybody. So I'm even wondering, how attractive are they as a purchase? This is not Marvel. This is not Star Wars. It's just not. I don't know if the upside is as strong, especially when you have to sit across the table from someone like Vince McMahon, that you have to hold your nose to begin with. Like, these companies have to think about the upside of this. I don't know how attractive of a buy it is.
It's content, though. And if you're Comcast owns NBC Universal, is that right?
Yeah.
Or they yeah. So I mean, if you're ever on Peacock, so much of it is WWE. I mean, it really has got to be one of like the big drivers of subscriptions. So it's content, and right. I mean, it's the difference between renting or owning, right? So maybe just it makes sense for them to own it, just so you're not shelling out the money. But right, I mean, where's the revenue? Their live attendance is fine. It's not, I think it's better than it's been in the past, but it's not what it was.
The numbers they're doing in live attendance now, if they were doing them 20 years ago, they'd be going out of business,
Yeah.
Right, but their model has shifted so much. I mean, they're not like a New Japan where so much of it is based on the live gate. It is, as Al said, it's the media rights. It's the you generate money through digital channels as well, like YouTube and things of that nature. You generate money through through selling stuff at WWE shop and at the live events. Sometimes those are there's a tendency to look at those things as the cherry on top, but those can be great drivers of revenue as well.
A couple other names that have been floated that are really intriguing. One is the Khan family, the other Khans, Tony Khan and his father, which are just, would be incredible. And you talk about like the ultimate irony, if they ended up buying WWE and there was some kind of merger. I don't know how realistic that is, beyond the fact that we know the Khans have a crap ton of money, right? So it's not.
But they don't have Comcast money, though.
Yeah. Yeah,
there would if they were to do it, they would need to have somebody backing them. It couldn't just be Shad Khan writing a check. I mean, that would be, that would be suicidal from his point of view and economically, financially speaking, to do that. I mean, why would he do that?
And then the other one, and I think what you just said certainly applies here too, is Dwayne Johnson. Could he be part of some investor group that could buy WWE? I'd be less sort of bullish about that because I think in that scenario we could see Vince McMahon stick around, because I think there's a lot of reverence and respect there from Dwayne Johnson for Vince McMahon.
Well, you saw the Khans say in one of the most condescending things I've ever heard of, just the thought of it, that they would entertain the notion of keeping Vince on if they bought the company. Could you imagine, like, they're just Vince McMahon working for? I just think that's a fantasy.
I would rather it be Triple H or Stephanie than him, but I will say, if they do, and I think it's a snowball's chance in hell that they would ever be the ones to buy it. But if the Khan family bought it, somebody else needs to run WWE. You can't have Tony's already doing way too much.
Right.
Arguably he should be handing off Ring of Honor or parts of AEW just because, for the sake of people to oversee, make it more consistent, because there are weeks where it's really good and then there are details that get lost because it's mostly one guy doing all this himself. I mean, I can speak to that as being the only editor here in our office. It's nowhere near the same scale, but it can get difficult to keep track of all the moving parts, and you really do need to be able to rely on other people to guide you. So I would just I think them purchasing it is a bad idea for many reasons. I don't want to see a monopoly, but
I think it would be bad for AEW too.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think you'd end up seeing AEW fall by the wayside.
They'd be completely overshadowed. I mean, if you've invested that much money in WWE, which is essentially like a far bigger brand, far bigger money-making potential, AEW becomes like, it's going to just atrophy, if not just become absorbed in a worst-case scenario. Like, why would you're not going to give the same attention to it anymore, even if you have somebody else running WWE for you. If that's still the lion's share of your income, that's going to be where your attention goes.
I don't think there'd be a need for an AEW. I mean,
right.
And again, this is pie in the sky. I don't expect it to happen. But in a scenario where it did happen, I would assume Tony Khan would just shift to running WWE, and AEW gets absorbed into the WWE umbrella. WWE is the brand, and he gets to run the biggest wrestling brand in the universe.
So he's not just trying. So he's not just trying to buy that valuable WWE tape library.
You touched on it, Kevin. We should talk about it because this is a really important part of the story, and that is Stephanie and Triple H. You could talk about the future. In Stephanie's case, we already know what the future is, or at least the present. She's gone. She put out the diplomatic statement saying she wants to return to spending time with her family, and she's going to be cheering WWE on. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. Triple H has reportedly now held a couple of meetings with talent over the last couple of weeks, offering reassurances that nothing is going to change. And this is what you hear whenever, there's a big management shift or ownership shift. Right. And I'm sure he's being told that.
Stephanie just held one of those meetings like a few weeks ago too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that might be the case for the moment. But I don't believe even Triple H believes that, right? I mean, how long before it is 100%, business? How long before Vince is back on the headset screaming in Michael Cole's ear?
Oh no.
Yeah. And Michael Cole, who's been doing somersaults essentially since Vince has been gone. And
this has got to be just so deflating for everybody over there. Yeah.
I think there's going to be books written about this, documentaries. There's so much going on that we don't know right now, but you just, there's got to be so much turmoil because this is not normal. This kind, especially the Stephanie situation. I'm leaving. I'm back. I'm leaving again. Like, that's just not a normal way to run a business, no matter how you want to rationalize it and explain. I know Nick Khan gave reasons of why it went down and all that stuff. And I've heard things, and I'm sure you guys may have heard of, just like when these corporate nice little statements aren't coming out, that Stephanie was very much blindsided by a lot of this. And I think I might have read it in the Observer or somewhere of just her being actually pretty upset when it all came down, and not just saying, oh, well, my dad is back. I'm no longer needed here. So long, everyone. Like, it was not like that. And we know that Stephanie and Triple H opposed a sale, and they voted against Vince coming back. I mean, it cannot be a healthy dynamic. I mean, I would not be holding my breath for Triple H staying on as creative, whatever his title is, content officer. To be honest with you, it just would be, you'd be foolish to think that he's going to be there in the long term for that. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, you wish there was some way for WWE, its talent, its employees, to sort of collectively stand up and say, we're not having it. And I don't know, you boycott Raw or WrestleMania or something like that. Because and I don't expect anything to happen, but it really is, it's sort of heartbreaking. I mean, that especially because, again, we had a few months there where you saw how good it could be. And all you heard was stories of wrestlers kind of being happy to come to work, right? And we've all had, those jobs, right, where you've got the right manager, and it's just great, like the morale in the locker room is great, and then then Kevin gets hired. I kid.
Well done.
But I thought you were going a different direction with that. And you were going to knock Stu.
No, I mean, this is definitely not of any of my Pro Wrestling Illustrated experience, but in other jobs, for sure. And it's just deflating. I mean, you know what it is to work for like a boss where you hate it and you hate coming to work every day. I think for so long, wrestlers and everybody in WWE didn't know anything else, right? I mean, this is just what it is. And Brian, you can speak to this. You lived it. This is what it is to work for WWE. And then you saw, oh, wow, it could be better, right?
Right. I was going to say, like, you're talking about everybody's had that experience of working for that company and having that boss. And I was going to say, yeah, I've had that experience. You literally at the exact company we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Did you ever get no, right? I mean, Vince was there ever a semblance of this there was management changes in the magazine?
Well,
right?
There was, because it was like Vince is always very hands-on, like we used to laugh about how this would be like if Michael Eisner had to approve Disney, like goofy baseball hats at Disney, like if they would bring him the design and he had to pick which one. And that's the level of control that Vince always wanted. And the problem is it would trickle down. So we didn't have to deal with him on a daily basis, but we did have a period where we had to deal with Shane on a daily basis. He was our boss. And look, it's a complicated relationship. Shane is a very nice guy, and he is the most down-to-earth and approachable person of that family, without question. But he had his dad on him. And so as a result of that, it trickled down, and it was like he felt like he had to act almost as the proxy of his dad. So, and he changed a lot. There were people that worked for him when he first started there that said it was a very different experience. The experience I had, it became like what TV was with Vince. Very hectic, crazy hours, on call, things changing at the last minute, 40 different covers for approval, like just madness. And it was like that trickle down mania. That's what was going on. So we definitely felt that. A lot of people felt it. It shouldn't have had to be that way. I don't think he would have run it that way, Shane, if he got to do it his own way. It didn't need to be run that way. We all know a magazine with a 4-week lag time. Like, you don't need to run it that way. It doesn't have to be like we're at the New York Times every second, putting out 2 editions a day, but that's what it became. And it was because of, it's that, I hate to say it, it's that toxicity of having somebody like that at the top. It infects everything. It's very true.
And one of the things that again makes this so sort of compelling and just weird is that family dynamic, that it is Vince at the helm, and he steps away, and his daughter is installed as CEO, and her husband, Vince's son-in-law, is running creative, and so on top of all the dynamics of different visions for management, there's also family politics, and I think about it, I mean, how weird this must be for Stephanie, with being caught between her father and her husband, or for Triple H for that matter, and all of that. It influences your decisions, right? I mean, you can't purely do what you feel is right, because there's so many other factors you have to consider.
And it's all she's ever known, too.
Right. It is. And didn't Vince allude to in an interview, I don't know if it was on the Pat McAfee show or somewhere else, but it was, he doesn't do a lot of other interviews, saying that like family can really disappoint you too sometimes when you're in business with family.
Yeah, that's all I've been thinking
very
about.
Ominous.
I never felt like I would be in a position to have sympathy and pity for Stephanie McMahon, but I do, and it feels terrible. And I don't understand. Sometimes it's almost like a self-flagellation. It's like, here you have a father, like you said, Kevin, and he did this publicly, downing his own kids, making them out to be incompetent, and he can't rely on them. Now he's out of the company, and she's on TV cheerleading and thanking him, and tears in her eyes, my daddy, this and that. And then after that, he comes back and kicks her out again. Like, how long could you take stuff like that? You know what I mean? As a kid of somebody like that, even if you're a little bit like him, as a kid of somebody like that, there's got to come a time where you finally say, all right, enough, I'm out, Well,
that's just it. I mean, we talked about how people who work for WWE have never known any other way. When I think about this, I think a lot about Chris Jericho, and how Jericho, for all those years, said, I would never work for anybody other than Vince McMahon, or never work for any other company in WWE. And then he got a taste of how it could be. And I think it's sort of like, being kidnapped and your whole life living in prison, and then you see like there's a world outside, and that kind of thing, and it does feel like that way. And for those 6 months with Triple H, and it's interesting that, and again, if anybody comes out looking good here, I think it's Triple H, because I've just been so blown away by how professional and diplomatic and just what a good job he did. Not just in running a wrestling company, but in navigating all of this. He always, you talk about the politics. I mean, he has been like the consummate politician in a good way, that he has been able to, and even till now, I think he's saying all the right things, and it's going to drive him nuts, because like you had this thing, right? I mean, it was his for a little while, and I guess still technically is. But he's got to feel it slipping away, and what can you do? It's not only the guy who brought you in and sort of like helped bring you to this level. It's your wife's dad. It's just it's got to be really, really frustrating for him. Yeah. Anyhow, anything else you want to cover on this? Is there an angle? What if anything? Does this mean for WrestleMania? We're now getting into the road to WrestleMania, Royal Rumble in a couple of weeks. There's various reports about whether The Rock is in or is not, but does WrestleMania look different? My thought is, Vince will get a lot more hands-on for this show, right? I mean, he's kind of like let go of WWE for the last several months. And regardless of ratings and success and kind of like praise from fans and pundits, it's not his vision for WWE. And I think certainly going into the biggest show of the year and a particularly big one, Hollywood, they've sold all these seats. I think he's going to grab this, and make it clear that this is his WrestleMania.
I think if Rock Roman does happen, and there's conflicting reports about that, I think that has been his top priority for several years. So maybe that's enough to satiate him in a way. He also, to his credit in this case, saw the value in bringing back Cody Rhodes as the American Nightmare and putting him on pace to, compete for the WWE Championship at a presumably a big event like WrestleMania. So I think some of the plans that Vince may have had, big picture, wouldn't look all that different than what Triple H has done. But it's the in the weeds stuff, and it's whether he wants to micromanage the rest of the card, as Brian would say.
We'll know if there's an angle involving like Cody driving a truck into Roman Reigns, something involving a large vehicle backstage.
Right.
We'll know Vince is back.
We'll also know if he decides to main event again against Stone Cold Steve Austin like he did last year, then we'll definitely know he's back. I mean, I think that the decision making, it almost feels like a lot of this stuff, it gets to like an autopilot phase where it's like inevitable in a way. But I think I'm not saying that Vince isn't going to go back to like full creative control. I think that's a very possible scenario. But I also wonder if in the short term, especially being away now 6 months, taking time off, and then focusing on like this corporate stuff, if part of him might actually be semi-relieved, especially with the product doing well, that he doesn't have to deal with the constant grind of TV, saying, okay, it's in pretty good hands. People seem to like it. The ratings are strong. Maybe I just focus on corporate things and big picture things. And even when it comes to TV creative, I'm not saying I'm not going to be involved at all, but I deal with big picture things. I'm not on the headset. I'm not deciding what color boots Seth Rollins wears. I'm not deciding every angle on TV. I'm the guy that goes like, okay, yes, that's your main event. Or no, I don't like that. Or I'm the guy who steps in and goes, why are we pushing this guy? Maybe I'm not doing every little thing. So I think that could be a possible scenario, at least in the short term, until a sale happens or whatever, where it's like he's not managing the minutia because he doesn't feel like he has to right now.
Yeah, I think that's the best case scenario. And I think they'd probably say that that's where this is headed. But even if that's the intention, I just can't imagine, Karrion Kross is going to go out there presumably at some point and have a big match with Rey Mysterio. And I'm sure Vince is going to be watching saying, what the hell is this guy doing there? I told you this guy is no good. And I think that's going to be the case for, everybody who he let go, that Triple H got back. So I think as much as he could tell himself and say that I'm going to let Triple H run this, I just don't think he's going to allow himself to. And it's fine when the visions kind of coincide and or at least it's not that much of a departure, but whenever Vince will see something that he is very much opposed to, and it could be the use of the word wrestling, I think it's all going to go back to the way it was. It's really disheartening. Again, I think about like, man, we had it so good for a few months there,
Yes, we'll say.
Yeah. Anyhow, thanks so much, guys. Kevin, I hope you can do something with this for the magazine.
We have a lot.
Yeah, break out the auto transcribe software.
There we go.
So, like I said, I hope to be back soon talking about the Year in Wrestling, the Achievement Awards, going through all that. So, stay tuned. Until then, thanks so much, guys. Anything you want to plug real quick?
For me, it's just the usual stuff. It's the Blood and Fire my Sheik biography. I do have a new book in the works. I can't talk about it yet. I'm just dying to talk about
Such
it.
a tease.
I know.
Like Stacey
Brian,
Dixie Carter here.
Brian, after all these months, I have been like a tortoise trying to run its way through a book. I was reading Keith Elliott Greenberg's previous into his book first, and yours was next on deck, and I finally started it a couple days ago, and I'm moving through it, and it's delightful. So
thank you so much.
Copy.
Thank you.
I'm sorry it's taken this long, and I enjoyed the dedication that you wrote to me about copy.
There is the audio version too. You know, you could.
Oh, that's also very true. I wish I had a slightly longer commute, but that's it.
All right, guys. Thank you so much, and we'll be back soon.